Yo, what's up? This is Eldritch Terror, and welcome back to my channel where I like to talk about all things spooky, scary, and have a little bit of fun. Today on the channel, we're going to be talking about Blumhouse and Leigh Whannell's 2025 Wolfman. And yes, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding this film. You see, let me give you a brief history lesson on the failed Dark Universe real quick. A few years ago, Universal decided that they wanted to reboot the Monsters universe, and they decided to go about this by rebooting some of the key franchises with different kind of vibes behind them, with the intention of them later crossing into a bigger project. But these movies didn't make it any further than Dracula Untold or Tom Cruise's The Mummy. And because of that, all of those franchises' plans were just shafted for another day. It seems that other day would come in a form when Universal would give the green light to Leigh Whannell to take all these Universal Monsters properties and just kind of do whatever he wanted with them. The first of these new Monsters movies came with The Invisible Man, and now we've arrived at The Wolfman 2025. Wolfman 2025. Yes, it seems that this movie is so far removed from the source material that they're not even attempting to call it The Wolfman. This movie is called Wolfman. Two separate words. I mean, it is though. And having seen The Invisible Man and the trailers for this movie, I knew that I wasn't going into a retelling of anything that we'd seen before. No, Leigh likes to take his own approach with these kinds of movies. Leading up to this film's release, we saw a lot of promotional material that included information. Like for one, we had the Halloween Horror Nights photo op in which a Wolfman was present to take pictures. That stunt didn't go over well, and it was quickly removed, and people have been debating online ever since whether or not that's what the design of the Wolfman was really going to look like. We've also seen a lot of buzz about how this was not going to be your conventional werewolf movie, and how the werewolf curse was going to be treated more like a virus, if anything. So with all that said, I prepared myself for a Blumhouse werewolf movie. I knew that this wasn't a Universal Monsters movie. I just wanted to see a Blumhouse werewolf movie. So let's dive into that and see what we got. Wolfman is a 2025 American horror film directed by Leigh Whannell from a screenplay he co-wrote with Corbett Tuck, and Jason Blum has been slotted in the producer's seat under his Blumhouse Productions banner. The film identifies as a loose reboot of The Wolfman from 1941. The film stars Christopher Abbott, Julia Gardner, Matilda Firth, and Sam Yeager, and follows a man seeking to protect his wife and daughter from a werewolf, only to become infected and slowly transform into the creature himself. The film opens with a shot of ants overwhelming a bee, something I believe is supposed to be meaningful later. Then we get some titles on screen explaining that in 1995, a hiker's vanishing in the remote mountains of Oregon sparked speculation about a virus linked to the region's wildlife. When he was found, something was very wrong with him, and the natives called it hill fever or the face of the wolf. We are then introduced to a young Blake Lavelle and the semi-militaristic lifestyle that he lives, led by his father Grady, a doomer retired war vet with extensive PTSD. During a hunting trip on their mountainous Oregon property, Grady stops Blake and tells him how much he admires the view from their home, but Blake doesn't seem to return this sentiment. In the woods, Blake quickly becomes distracted by the clouds, the trees, the fungus on the ground, pretty much showing us that this kid's got a real bad case of ADHD. And this dilly-dallying gets him scolded by his father. Grady tells Blake that you gotta stay on your toes because this world, life can be taken from you quickly. In that moment, they notice a deer nearby, but when they get it to their sights, the deer flees. Grady turns to tell Blake to stay close, but when he does, the boy's already gone. Deep in the woods, a young and solo Blake searches for the deer, but instead finds the Wolfman. So when we see the Wolfman right here, it's just for a brief second, but I can 100% confirm that this is the HHN Wolfman right here. Grady arrives just in time, and the father-son duo escape into a treehouse/deer lookout and lay back, guns drawn to defend themselves. When the wolf makes its way to the top of the ladder, however, he chooses not to climb into the treehouse, instead opting to paw at the bottom of the door a few times before being called away by a distant whistle. Later that night, Blake overhears his dad talking to a friend on a CB radio, insisting that they go out and find this animal to keep their boys safe. Okay, so this lookout treehouse thing, I have to describe this to you here because I don't really have any pictures of it. Imagine like 4x4 is the floor, and you've got like 3.5 foot walls all the way around the sides. Then you've got like 5 or 6 foot beams holding up the sides, and then a roof on top of it. The whole thing's maybe 10-15 feet off of the ground, and there's a ladder going up to it. So you're telling me that this Wolfman climbed up to the top of the ladder, and then instead of like getting up and like crawling over the thing and eating these two people here, he just like paws at the bottom of it and scratches it up a little bit. We're off to a good start. 30 years later, Blake has moved on from his mountain man life and has instead settled down in the bustling city of San Francisco. Here we meet his daughter, a very young and very energetic girl named Ginger, who in her introduction scene decides to break away from her father and play in some traffic. Blake tries to get her down, but after she ignores him long enough, he grabs her down and scolds her, before immediately apologizing as it invoked feelings from his childhood within him, having to be stern with her, and he explains that he doesn't want to be that kind of dad. Arriving home, we are now introduced to his wife, Charlotte, when in a terrible stroke of timing, she enters the home arguing with her co-workers, and Blake receives a letter explaining that his father had passed away, along with some attached keys to his childhood home. This sparks an argument between the two, and their daughter has to act as the diffuser here. The next day, Blake surprises Charlotte at work and professes his concerns for their marriage, stating that they should make an effort to make things better with a family trip back to his childhood home to collect his late father's possessions. He argues that between his traumas and her being too busy with work to spend time with the family, that this could be just what they all need to fix things up. So the family rides all the way from San Fran to the mountains of Oregon. And when they arrive, Blake realizes that it's been so long since he's been out here that he's gotten them completely lost. While he checks the map, the girls notice a strange figure staring them down intently. Blake drops the window and asks the man for directions, realizing that he is Derek, a childhood acquaintance that was briefly mentioned earlier. Derek explains that they shouldn't be out after dark up here, and that if he were to show them the way, he'd have to ride with them in their truck. Charlotte hates this idea, as Derek here is your stereotypical mountain man, and she is immediately off-put by his demeanor. But Blake grew up out here and knows that this is just the life, so he invites him in. Before they arrive, however, Blake sees a werewolf standing covered in blood in the middle of the road and quickly jerks the van off of a side of a cliff, avoiding hitting the monster, but sending the van tossing into some trees perched about 25 feet off of the ground. Disorientated and confused, Derek attempts to open the door and falls to the ground below, bleeding and moaning in agony. Blake instructs the girls to climb to the upward-facing side of the van and crawl out through a window and attempt to scale a tree to the ground. But once both of the girls make it out and are seated on top of the van, the wolf appears, ignoring the wounded man on the ground and the two people on top of the truck out in the open. The wolf instead attempts to scale the bottom-facing portion of the van to get to the open door that Derek fell from. Noticing this, Blake shuts the door and takes a small scratch from the wolf in the process. With the door now shut, the wolf opts to drop down below and drag Derek to a safe place to feast. Blake, Charlotte, and Ginger take this opportunity and run for Blake's father's home. Thankfully, the fall managed to drop them in the prime positioning for a straight dash there. Pursued by the wolf, the family makes it inside just in time and barricades the door to the home. Once inside, Blake fires up the generators and whips out his dad's old CB radio. He explains to Charlotte that this radio is the only tool that they have here that can reach someone for help. He instructs her to use it and then heads back upstairs to put Ginger to bed after the insane night that she's had. He explains to her that the things she saw tonight were terrible things and that can leave a hefty scar on you. He shifts the blame, however, from the monster to himself and tells her that it is his fault that she witnessed a werewolf attack tonight and that he would make sure that she never has to see something like that ever again. Just outside the door, Charlotte is listening to their conversation intently. I thought perhaps she was reflecting on how she wished that she could comfort her daughter the way that Blake can. But as it turns out, she's much more worried about the immediate danger lurking outside. We can't be too smart here. Shortly after this convo, Blake returns to fortifying the front door of the house obsessively, and as he tries to talk to his family, they both stare blankly at him. Over the next few hours, Blake starts to show signs of infection, losing teeth, sweating profusely, losing his ability to communicate, and finally experiencing noise and light sensitivities. He begins hearing a loud stomping echoing throughout the house. So one of the cool things that this movie does do is it shows the hearing and vision that the werewolf kind of goes through. We get these cool infrared effects as he looks around and sees everything. But with the development of his senses, it also comes with the loss of the ability to communicate with anybody. He's trying to talk to his family and like on his end, he's just like, and in his ears, he just hears his family talking about thinking that it could be the werewolf. He follows the sound until he sees the culprit, none other than a small spider climbing across the walls. Zeroing in on his newfound powers, he locates the wolfman as he circles the home outside, passing windows as they reveal their matching movements, all the way to the unprotected back door of the home. Here, the wolf reaches inside through a doggy door and holds on to Blake's leg. Charlotte runs and grabs a hammer left by the front door and beats the wolf's arm until he later retreats to the front door again. Okay, so The werewolf is banging on the front door. He's banging on it so hard that the dad is like, man, he's gonna knock that thing off its hinges. Quick thing to note, the werewolf's not really strong or anything. It's about as strong as like a regular man would be. But regardless, that man is pounding on that door trying to get inside and eat this family. And this house is covered in windows, wide open windows. There's like all over this place. There's a back door that's unfortified, everything. And the werewolf, for one reason or another, refuses to try to enter any other way than the front door of this house the entire movie. It's ridiculous. Straight up, man, every time they're walking around and they're walking past all these windows, I'm just like, what is going on here? I thought maybe the werewolf just like was so animalistic it lacked the critical thinking needed to like figure that out, but I don't know. I don't want to spoil anything for you now. Charlotte grows increasingly worried as Blake loses all motor functions and his hair starts falling out, as do more teeth and fingernails, with fangs and talons growing out from underneath, and fur starts growing all over his body. She attempts to communicate with him one last time by handing him a pen and some paper where he simply scrawls, "Dying." Even young Ginger takes note of her father's rapid transformation and attempts to give him a pep talk, though he still cannot understand her. Charlotte notices Blake's arm bleeding much worse than before, and when she unwraps it to inspect it, Blake dodges free and begins eating himself alive, feasting upon his wound. Acknowledging that something must be done immediately, Charlotte grabs her family and instructs them out into the wolf's night in an attempt to reach Blake's father's dilapidated old truck. Unsure if the truck can even start, they load in one by one and Charlotte grabs a conveniently placed battery. With her car door wide open, Charlotte cranks that thing, and she does it so loud that every wolf on every mountain in the state could hear it. The car gasps to life, and as it does, it activates the wipers, removing the years of built-up scum from the windshield, and revealing the Wolfman laying belly down on the hood of the car, looking straight into Charlotte's soul. He breaks free from his aversion to smashing glass here and punches straight through the windshield, reaching for Charlotte. The family flees in terror from the vehicle as the wolf's arm is currently trapped in the glass. But they don't run for the home, however. No, these guys know the better option is to scale to the top of a nearby greenhouse and see what happens. Okay, so this is one of the more frustrating sequences of the movie for me. So the family is fleeing from this werewolf, right? There's a house, and then there's a greenhouse that's like closer than the house. So they decide to run into the greenhouse. They don't go inside of the greenhouse. They climb on top of the greenhouse. And may I remind you, earlier in this film, we saw this werewolf scale like 25 feet up to a truck and then like climb like Spider-Man on the side of it. So there's no reason to believe that climbing on top of this greenhouse is gonna keep your family safe here. The werewolf pursues, and instead of climbing the greenhouse, he goes inside of the greenhouse and then jumps up and down trying to slash at them from the bottom. I already know that there's going to be people trying to say in the comments that this movie was fantastic, that I'm just being a hater, but it's parts like this that I'm going to point to that just are inexcusable, man. So the dad's like, all right, this isn't going to work out for us. I'm going to create a distraction and go werewolf duel with this guy. You guys go up to the house, and they go their separate ways. The dad jumps down and we get a kind of off-screen werewolf fight, seemingly winning the duel and then retreating back to the house himself. After his duel with the wolf, Blake stands at the back door and waits to be let back in by Charlotte. Inside, he takes a reprieve on the couch, and Ginger attempts one last time to cheer up her sick father. Hearing the loving words from his daughter, Blake falls on all fours and begins violently vomiting an excessive amount of blood, and a large human thumb seems to fall out in the mix. The family is revolted by this, and as if on cue, the werewolf emerges into the home and attacks Blake. Another werewolf showdown ensues, and when Blake gets the upper hand, he tears through his opponent's neck, killing him. Now seeing the werewolf in the light, Blake notices a tattoo on the wolf's arm, reading Lavelle. This werewolf had been his father. Horrified by his actions, Blake leaves the home and collapses in pain, seemingly transforming further into a wolf himself. Returning to the home again, Blake is now very, very hungry, and when his family quickly realizes he's finally lost himself, they flee again in fear, chasing them into a barn and digging under the door like a doggy. Blake stalks up to his prey, inches from their faces, and waits for his moment to strike. When that moment comes and he lunges forward, A conveniently placed bear trap snares him in place, creating a perfect gap for Ginger and Charlotte to flee. Given no other option here, Blake chews through his leg, amputating it and pursuing on all fours after the girls. As they run, Charlotte finds Derek's body and retrieves his gun, and Wolf Blake chases them into the same treehouse, into the exact same defensive position he had been in with his father 30 years before. Though this time, when he climbs the ladder and reaches the door, he stands tall, showing that he is ready and able to enter and feast on the family. As he begins to make his move, however, he stops and stands still. Ginger looks at her father, and then back to her mother, and tells her that she thinks he wants her to kill him and put this long night to an end. Charlotte appears confused and hesitates for a moment, but when Blake jumps towards her, she fires and sends him to the forest floor. The final shot of the film shows Ginger and Charlotte walking miles from the forest, and stopping to take a look at the view from the beginning that Blake's father loved so much, and that Blake seemingly hated, taking in all of its beauty and embracing their new life without Blake. So that was The Wolfman. What did you think of the movie? Am I being transparent enough already about how I felt about it? Let me go back to the beginning of the movie and talk about the shot of the bee that we saw. I think that this was Winnell's attempt at being a little bit artsy and strategic with his metaphors here. If I had to guess, the bee are the dad or the werewolf, and the ants represent the wife and daughter that overcame the odds. But I don't really know if that counts as foreshadowing here, when there were so many other cases of foreshadowing that just never had any payoff. Like, the family never fixed anything. The dad and the mom never came to terms with any of their problems. There was no resolution within any of the conflicts in this movie. There were no odds that were overcame. Even down to the end of the film, the dad just submits and then they shoot him. Like, there's nothing interesting that really happened there. The CB radio never gets put to use. The werewolves never actually catch anybody. There's so much teasing throughout this movie and no payoffs at all anywhere. And speaking of no payoffs, what was up with the whistle at the beginning of the movie that called that first werewolf away? Is there somebody out there that's like hurting these werewolves or something? What's up with that? And there were definitely 3 werewolves in this movie, like the one from the beginning, Grady, and then Blake. 3 werewolves. But like, this confuses me in so many ways. Like, one, whatever happened to the werewolf from the beginning? We never had any reason to believe that Grady had killed him before he had become infected with the hill fever or whatever. And I have so many questions because the wolf that we see dead at the end of the movie that turns out to be the dad is definitely not the same wolf that was chasing them throughout the rest of the movie. I don't have a shot of the wolf dead on the floor, but if you've seen the film, you know what it looks like. You get a good look at it. And this wolf right here, this is the one from Halloween Horror Nights. This is not the wolf from the end of the movie. So like, I have so many questions. Were there reshoots? Did they have that original design and then they decided to bail out on it, but they were just really lazy with it? I don't know, man. I don't know what's going on here. This movie is a mess. All right, I gotta talk about here how on the nose the dialogue is with the family. Like, the wife walks in, she's on the phone yelling at her coworker. Blake's looking at the death certificate for his father. He's all overwhelmed. He's like, hey, can you just please like take that somewhere else for a minute? Like, I need to process something. And Charlotte turns to him and she's like, can you not do that? It's just such an on-the-nose petty argument. And then the daughter's like, I'm never gonna argue in front of my kids when I have kids. She's like 10 years old. And then the dad looks at her and he goes, I know, I'm just having a really hard time processing these emotions that I'm going through because while my dad was alive, I didn't really talk to him enough. And while I didn't miss it back then, and I don't miss him, I just wish that I could make up for more lost time. Raw, unfiltered, just like, people go to therapy for like years for that stuff. And he's just spitting it out to this 10-year-old like that. It's just so on the nose. It's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And man, the dialogue in the car ride is so bad. I feel like they told them to improvise here, and it was just a bunch of people that have never interacted with children before. And then the child herself just sitting back there like, I'm doing my best. I'm making money right now. I'm in a Universal movie. This scene where he surprises her at work is just so uncomfortable because of the way that the actors portray the whole thing. These people don't feel like they've known each other long enough to have raised a 10-year-old together. They don't feel like they know each other at all. It's so bizarre. I get more of a vibe that this dude's like her stalker, creeper ex-boyfriend than anything. I mean, the way that she acts when he shows up is like he caught her cheating or something. It's so awkward. People have tried to relate this movie and the transformation that Blake goes through here to The Fly, and I just think that that's very disrespectful to The Fly. Because though it takes like the majority of the movie for him to go through this transformation and you see like every step of it as it kind of slowly happens, the effects and the gravity around what's happening with him is nowhere near what it was in The Fly. This is not not a comparable thing here. This is just a really slow werewolf transformation, and in my opinion, if they had just done this whole thing here in this one little part, it probably would have been a lot cooler. It probably would have hit a lot harder. The whole slow, gradual transformation thing, it worked for The Fly. That's not a werewolf trope, I'm sorry. It didn't hit it for me, I'm sorry. And in The Fly, his transformation was like very slow. It didn't happen over the course of a night. It took days for him to go through all of that, in which during the process, he actually impregnated a woman, and the implications of that were insane as well. Do not try to relate the Wolfman's transformation to The Fly's transformation. It is not the same thing at all. This has to be the weakest werewolf transformation I've ever seen. They already posted this on the internet, so you can go watch it, but it's just really unsmooth looking CGI. And the most disappointing part of this transformation is that after whatever happens here happens, he doesn't really look any different than he did before. They show him a bunch before, they show him a bunch after, and I swear to you, the prosthetics that they put on him or whatever, it was not enough to make an intelligible difference. Let me just talk a minute about my man Derek. Okay, so first of all, this guy shows up like we're supposed to know who he is in any capacity. There's that one brief line at the beginning of the movie where the dad's talking on the CB to his friend, and he's like, "We gotta go out there and get that wolf, protect our boss." But that's like the only mention of like his friend having a son or anything like that. And then Derek just shows up and he's like, "Hey man, I'm Derek. What, you don't remember me? I'm Derek. Come on, big guy, I'm Derek." And he's also just like such a stereotypical mountain man. It's so funny. He's talking to Blake and he's like, "Hey man, how you been? Where you been working at these days?" Blake's like, "Yeah man, I'm just kind of a stay-at-home dad. I'm taking care of this little monster back here, you know." Derek's like, "Got soft hands then, huh?" He doesn't say that, but you just can tell he's thinking it. Charlotte's in the backseat like, "Hey, I'm actually the breadwinner. I'm a journalist." And then Derek hits her with the... Dude, it's just so great. I probably said this term enough, but on the nose. Dude, it's just so funny. Honestly, I feel like Leigh Whannell hasn't seen any of the original Wolfman stuff. I think that he may have only seen the 2010 one, because the ending of this movie is like way more on par with that than anything else in this movie has anything to do with any original iconic Wolfman lore. When I made my video about this movie before it came out, I said that it looked like this movie was gonna take the worst parts of that movie and expand on them and throw whatever else it could that would just be as bad as possible. And well, I was right. Na boo boo, I was right. This movie's garbage, I don't know what to tell you. But that's enough of me being mean-spirited. I'm just playing around. Everyone has the right to enjoy what they do, and everyone likes their own cup of tea, you know what I mean? What's not for me may be right for you, and vice versa. So what did you think about the Wolfman? Wolfman. Did you enjoy it? Did you like The Invisible Man? How do you think this one compared with that? Are you interested in seeing more of these new spins taken on the Universal monsters? Or are you like me and just wish that Blumhouse would stop making remakes, period? I just don't want to see any more remakes from Blumhouse. But that's a story for a different day. If you like my video today, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. And don't forget to send it to a friend you think might enjoy it too. But as always, I've been Elder's Terror, and whether your day's been going good or bad today, I hope it gets better.